Hi, this video discusses briefing instrument approach plates. As ever, it's directed at PPLIR Europe's constituency of the IFR single pilot in Europe flying aircraft in the range of Cessna 172 to Chieftain, but the principles apply to all IFR pilots. Let's start with which plates to use. There are several sources of instrument approach plates available. The AIP, published by each individual country in their own individual format, governed by ICAO conventions, but with a lot of latitude for variation. They are free of charge and available to download from each country's AIP website and via flight planning apps such as 4Flight and SkyDemon. Printed copies become out of date, requiring a check and refresh at each AIRAC cycle. When used on 4Flight or SkyDemon, they can be downloaded for use offline on a country-by-country or airport-by-airport basis, although this again must be manually initiated for each cycle. They differ widely between countries in ease of use, readability, and the information they provide. Few state the legal minima directly, although that can be derived from the information provided using an app like AeroPlus IFR Minima. If used on paper, they're rather difficult to read when reduced to A5, so you can end up with a pile of unwieldy A4 sheets, which can be a management issue in a small cockpit. Jeppesen, the popular format used by pilots worldwide, available either through an annual subscription or one-off trip kit. Printed copies become quickly out of date and require a manual check for each AIRAC cycle. Tablet apps automatically update with the latest version on each cycle. However, support for Jeppesen's free JetView app has been discontinued, requiring paid tablet access through 4Flight, Garmin Pilot, or a few alternatives. Many plates are geo-referenced when displayed through 4Flight. The consistency of display format and the inclusion of all the important data, including minima, makes these very easy to use, but the cost is relatively high, particularly for those who only occasionally require them. Navigraph. The Jeppesen plates are published for use with flight simulators at much lower cost. While not intended to be used in flight, this allows pilots to practice flying any approach beforehand with identical information that will be used in flight. Navigraph data is accessed online and so does not require to be periodically updated by the user. Navigators. Recent aircraft navigation equipment, such as Garmin GTN, can provide much of the information required to fly an approach. This includes the frequencies, minimum altitudes for each leg, missed approach path, airfield elevation, and runway lengths. However, minima are not shown. There are no notes or warnings. The glide path angle is missing, as well as check altitudes and rate of descent. Some procedures are missing from the database, including DME, ARCs, VBT, and noise abatement. Data is updated together with the navigation database for each AIRAC cycle. Panel navigators must have current AIRAC data to be legal for IFR flight and could be used standalone for approaches, but the information is not easily accessible as from plates, and you may want to view other information prior to flying an approach. So let's look at how we display them. Tablet, as against paper, as against on the panel, as against downloading PDF. It's relatively easy to update the data on a tablet and can store a vast amount of data that covers the whole continent. The data can be accessed through an app, which may automatically update, or through simple PDF files that may not. However, tablets can fail in overheat, running out of battery, and so on, so risk that you lose access. Paper is reliable, provided that you've printed out a plate for the approach required, which may not be the case for an unplanned diversion. It's easy for paper plates to become outdated, and they would become bulky and unmanageable if covering a large number of approaches. Plates can display on either the MFD or the navigator, and some people swear by this way of doing it, but the user interface is usually pretty poor, and it occupies screen real estate that might be better used. If your navigation app cannot directly use Jeppesen plates, or if you don't use one, it can be a good idea to store them as PDFs, either accessible from your app as a document or in a product such as GoodReader. Let's look at the AIRAC cycle update. Plates can be downloaded to the tablet prior to or after the start of each AIRAC cycle, as they are published 2 weeks before it takes effect. Some apps do this automatically, while others require manual intervention. It's important and a legal requirement to use current data to avoid problems. Flying an instrument approach can be one of the higher risk times of a flight, so thorough preparation in advance reduces that risk by helping to ensure that you're familiar with its characteristics, including the 3D flight path. It also spreads the work to times with much less pressure, avoiding added stress and reducing peak workload, particularly if circumstances change or if data is not immediately available. Briefing early also ensures that you're qualified and equipped to fly the approach, considering factors such as, are we briefing the correct approach to the correct airport, equipment required, runway length, weather minima, approach category. So, when do we brief? Unless it's a route that they fly very often, most people will start the brief in the quiet of their homes or offices in the days leading up to the flight. The timing will depend on complexity. If I'm planning to fly to the deep Arctic or Africa, this might start weeks or months in advance. If it's to a standard European destination, it might be a couple of days ahead. Reviewing, in particular, AIP textual information to ensure that fuel is available, the position with border control and slots, maybe handling agents, as well as reviewing the approach well in advance, allowing time to consider any unusual aspects. This will also identify that you're equipped to fly it and that it's intended for aircraft of your category. The next brief will be before departure when you have weather and NOTAMs. You'll consider the likely weather minima and NOTAMs to reduce the chance of being below minima and having to go round and possibly divert. The area forecast will also help consider which alternates might be most suitable, and their approach plates should also be reviewed at this planning stage. Finally, immediately after ATIS is picked up, preferably before top of descent, at this point in the flight, you'll know what approach to expect. This is the time to refresh your knowledge and pick out the key factors in the approach, such as final approach track, minima, and missed approach sequence. You would also refer to the plate to cross-check data set up in your aircraft navigator. Now, what do we brief? It's not just the approach plate. We need to understand the star. Although we will almost certainly be following the lateral tracks on the navigator, many of us fly aircraft without VNAV, so we need to be sure to have looked at vertical constraints. Though these are usually amended by ATC, they give an indication of what to expect, and sometimes there's a strong indication of what to plan for. And occasionally, you'll be given a star with no other indication, and you need to be able to fly it fully, laterally and vertically. I had that recently going into the London TMA, which had been closed all morning by bad weather, and the controllers didn't have time to give vectors or altitudes. So I simply had to follow the star as charted. We need to brief the runway, including length, lighting and orientation, where we expect to park, and likely an alternative routes there, especially which turn-off to expect or would be most convenient. There may also be notes about permitted taxiways and routes and the limit to tower, ground and ramp authority. Although we probably brief the general notes before departure, it's worth just running your eye down them again, especially if some of the notes, such as noise abatement, are runway specific. And, of course, the approach plate itself, which I will focus on for the rest of the video. I brief an approach plate working methodically across each row down the page from top left to bottom right. I've seen others recommending doing it in other orders, but that seems to me to over-depend on memory and make it too easy to forget or skip over important aspects. The standard format of the Jeppesen plates provide consistency for this process. If you do use AIP plates, things are laid out differently in each country, but I would then even more recommend the left to right, top to bottom approach, as your eyes will pass each bit of information rather than having to hunt for them. Is this the correct airport? Briefing the wrong airport is one of those things like putting the wheels down. Those who haven't done it yet will do one day. Look at the speed category to check that it applies to you. It's not uncommon to have different procedures and different plates for different categories. Check that this is the approach you want. You're checking for runway direction. Look out for 1331 and 2002. Type of approach, and that you have the required equipment. Notice that Jeppesen marked the next 4 rows of boxes the briefing strip. Enter the frequencies into your radios as far ahead as you can. Some people will check the EGNOS channel against the box. Some airline ops manuals demand it. It's a step too far for me. Note the final approach course and, if you're on vectors and don't have glass, set it up on the HSI or OBS. Note the altitude at the final approach fix. Jeppesen often writes mandatory when it really isn't. I've tried to discuss this with them, but haven't got very far. Check the decision altitude. Sometimes this is in the briefing strip if it applies to all speed categories, but often refers to the minima table. You obviously need to know the elevation of the runway. The general MSA for 25 nautical miles from the airfield. This may be replaced by a TAA for each initial approach fix, or both may be published. I focus on the limiting altitude, the MSA from the airfield, and the TAA from an RMP initial approach fix, and that of the initial approach fix itself. Once cleared for an approach and within the MSA or TAA range, you can descend immediately to that altitude unless instructed otherwise. The final approach fix altitude is useful to ensure a cross-check with distance and glide slope, which would flag up an error in altimeter pressure setting if not matched. The minima are important, both RVR and the decision altitude. Study the missed approach. Set up any aids that are required, and when no longer required for the descent, set the missed approach altitude on the altitude selector if you have one. Next, the plan diagram. Ensure that you understand the procedure. It's often complicated with alternate procedures, so make sure that the correct one is set up on your navigator. Check the tracks and distances against the navigator flight plan. Look at where the holds are and their orientation. Calculate the correct hold for your arrival direction. Carefully study any notes. These are easy to overlook and can be very important, including setting conditions under which the approach can be used or adding extra procedures in textual form. Note the check altitudes. While these are only vital in 2D approaches, they're useful to check QNH and that you're on the correct glide slope on the ILS. Study the profile. Particularly note the descents prior to the final approach fix and the segment minimum altitude and step-down fixes. These are most important on 2D approaches where no vertical guidance is provided. Check the glide path angle. Considering how important this is to a safe and stable final approach, it's rather tucked away on both JEP and AIP plates. Estimate your ground speed on final approach and read off the rate of descent. For a 3-degree slope, that can be approximated as 5 times the ground speed. But even for a 3-degree slope, that's 6% out, and more if the slope is greater. This table gives a precise figure. The diagram of the lighting system gives you an idea what to expect, but frankly, you know whether you can see the lights at minima or not, so this is very limited use unless you're calculating your own minima. If you're using AIP plates without an RVR calculation, you do need to know the details of the approach lighting as they form part of the calculation. This block here gives you the initial missed approach. I'm not convinced that it's helpful and would prefer to look at the full missed approach instructions. The minima block gives the decision altitude, MDA, and minimum RVR for the approach. Make sure that you're looking at the correct speed category for your aircraft. Many small GA aircraft are Cap B. Commercial operations are obliged to use CDFA minima, but non-commercial operators may still descend to MDA if they wish, provided they remain above the step-down fixes. There is some confusion in the EASA rules about whether the pilot needs to calculate a derived decision altitude to ensure that the aircraft does not dip below the MDA in the go-around, but most people simply use the MDA as their decision altitude. The last section of the plate is the circling minima, or obstacle clearance altitude, and any associated notes. Although based on speed categories, these are expressed in jet plates with maximum speeds. Remember that even a small sidestep must be above circling minima. I wish you success with flying instrument approaches and hope this short video has stimulated some thought about how and when to brief them. See you in the next video.